So I want to talk about the men's football team because
Hmm.
I think that is the most famous symbol or thing associated with the Naval Academy. We all know about the Army Navy game and all that. So when did they start playing football? I'm assuming they're one of the first schools to do it. And why did they pick football versus perhaps another sport to really focus on?
Right, right. So the first football game was played at Navy in 1879. Okay, so quite a while ago. And I think the reason they started playing, I don't have any
Wow.
kind of historical reference on this, but just knowing that college football was just kind of starting to show up across the national stage, and Navy being a 4-year school like anybody else, they didn't want to be left out. Plus, when you think about this is one thing I didn't mention before, but when you think about the mission of the Naval Academy is basically to train midshipmen morally, mentally, and physically. Well, that physical component comes into play by, all these sports that they can play. And the reason for that is because there is really no better way, outside of a outside of a combat environment, obviously, to see how individuals react under pressure than on the field of competition, right? So that's why the Navy takes that physical mission so seriously, and that's why they're so proud of having that, the 36 varsity sports available for the men and women to take part in. So I believe that, even going back into 1879, that part of the mindset was, we got to make sure that our people are tough, when they hit the fleet. So football is one way to toughen them up, so.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the what maybe 150-year history of them playing, I think we're close to 150 years. What were the glory years? What was kind of the highlight years of the Naval Academy or the midshipmen on the football team?
Yeah, so they started playing Army in 1890. Okay, so that's when that series first got started, and Navy won the very first matchup like 24-0. But since then, there's been a lot of little ebbs and flows. If I had to pick out three time periods where Navy was particularly strong, was one was from 1950 to 1964, and that covered two coaches. The first guy was named Eddie Erdelatz, and he took over right about the time that Army was just a national powerhouse. I mean, they had Doc Blanchard and Glenn Davis, they back-to-back Heisman Trophy winners, and they were still strong going into the early 50s. Well, they'd just dusted Navy several times in a row throughout the 40s, and in Eddie Erdelatz's first year, Army was ranked second in the country, and they were ticked off because they weren't ranked first
Wow.
over Oklahoma. So when they asked Coach Erdelatz about this, he says, "Well, I'm pretty ticked off too. We're ranked 65th, and I think we should be ranked 64th." So that shows you the disparity in the teams. But Navy went out there and beat them 14-2, and basically took away Army's chances for a national championship that year. So they had enjoyed a really good decade in the 50s and into the early 60s when they had Roger Staubach. Obviously, he's probably Navy's
Hmm.
most prominent football player. Um,
Yeah, for sure.
and then if you go to um, just from 2002 to, I'm going to say 2021, and I'm marking those years because it's a nice solid 20 years. Before that, even when I was there, Navy was fairly mid-level. I mean, when I was there as a freshman, they did make it to a bowl game. Actually, the first 2 years they made it to a bowl game, but after that, things kind of started to slide a little bit, and they kind of went into a period that we refer to as the dark ages until a gentleman named Paul Johnson was hired back from Georgia Southern. He was Navy's offensive coordinator for a couple of years in the mid 90s, and he brought back the triple option, or his version of it anyway. And that is what basically set them on another level, because from then on, they ended up winning. I think if you go back and look, it's over 150 games they won. I think they basically won 60% of their games essentially,
Hmm.
and made it to several bowl games, won many of those. And the biggest thing for me anyway was they finally ended a 42 game losing streak to Notre Dame, which I
Wow.
just didn't think was ever going to end. But that happened in 2007. And then since then, Navy's beaten them three more times. So uh, I would say that right now they're probably in a little bit of a flat spot, but I like what's happening because they hired a new offensive coordinator. Things kind of went sideways in 2022. Navy's winning his coach, who's Ken Niumatalolo, who was hired right up the street from you at San Jose State.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
he was let go in 2022, which I did not really agree with that decision at all, but it is what it is. And they did make the right decision in hiring his replacement, who was the defensive coordinator there at Navy. And last year was a little bit rough, but we've got a really good offensive coordinator coming in. So there's a lot of excitement and expectations for this year to get back on the right side of the margin in terms of, winning season and competing for a Commander-in-Chief's trophy and maybe even getting to a bowl game.